Okay, you heard the note that this meeting is being recorded. So this is the Affordable Housing Committee meeting of Wednesday, April 8th. Time now is 7 o'clock. We're meeting in the Old Town Hall conference room as well as via Zoom. We do have a quorum, Mr. Chair. I'll turn things over to you.
Okay, great. Is it a good idea to maybe hold some of the issues like the minutes and our
I
other
think so.
introductions? Let Matt go ahead.
Yep.
And Matt, welcome.
Thank
Great
you.
to have you with us. Appreciate you being here. And you're going to be talking about something we're all really very interested in. And
Sure.
you have the floor.
Great. Well, thank you. And I apologize. I was not able to be there in person. I actually just finished a lacrosse practice with my son, so it was a quick change to get ready for this meeting. But appreciate you all accommodating me via Zoom. So yeah, I mean, I had a brief back and forth with Mark. I think you all are probably fairly familiar with at least understand that the housing bill was passed in November. Very quick history on that. There was a bill that was passed through the legislature in June or May, June of last year. And that was vetoed by the governor, really based on a lot of the concerns that municipalities had.
He introduced himself to everybody.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize.
Sorry. Go ahead, Matt. And maybe,
sorry about that.
maybe we should also introduce ourselves to Matt as well. So Matt, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, happy to. Sorry. Matt Fulda, Executive Director for the Connecticut Metropolitan Council Governments, or MetroCog, as we are more or less formally known. So I've been the Executive Director there since 2017, and I did help and work with legislative leadership in the governor's office on the bill that was passed in November. So I have a pretty good understanding of the bill. There's still a lot of some questions that are still out there that we're working to get addressed. But we look forward to working with each of our municipalities on this bill and on the provisions contained therein. So appreciate you all having me here tonight for a discussion. My guess is this is one of probably many with myself and some of our staff as we work through this process.
Well, let me start. You know me, Matt.
I do.
Mark Barnhart, Director of Community Economic Development, but I'll turn to our chair, Herb.
Hi, Matt, Herb Limecooler. Good to see you again.
Yeah, you as well.
Steve Grothwell,
Member.
member, yes.
Gretchen Gertner, Recording Secretary.
Jackie Page, member.
Deb Garskoff, member.
We have Lynn Moore from the public joining us, and I'm sorry, your name is?
My name is Reed Kwan.
Reed Kwan, also a member of the public, and Brian Vahey, also a member, is joining via Zoom. So we do have a quorum. So Matt, thank you for joining us tonight. I just asked Matt to give a kind of a brief overview of Public Act 25-1, Housing Growth Plan, specifically the growth plan component, the requirements, the timetable, the process by which those goals were established both at the state and regional level, and how they would potentially impact us. So with that, I'll turn things back over to Matt for his hopefully 10, 15 minutes, and then we'll have some time for questions.
Thank you, Mark. Yes. So, like I said, just brief history. There was a housing bill that was passed the General Assembly in June of 2025. That was eventually vetoed by the governor, really based on concerns that municipalities had in regards to a little bit of loss of control, but also some of the provisions that were just going to be very difficult for municipalities to comply with. It did require some additional housing planning work on top of the 830J plans that were already required. So there was a significant burden put on municipalities that the governor heard from many chief elected officials on, as well as a number of other groups that, I think everyone realized that their housing is a major issue in the state of Connecticut, but that bill was just not going to get us to a place where all of us thought it was going to make a substantive change. So over the course of the intervening 5 or 6 months, myself and one other COG director worked pretty closely with legislative leadership in the governor's office to kind of tweak the bill in certain ways that we think made it a much more impactful piece of legislation and much easier for municipalities to comply with and actually bring it forth and create the housing that is needed throughout the state of Connecticut. Mark asked, as he said, to kind of give a high level overview. So I'm happy to do that and then turn over to questions. I think the questions are probably more valuable for you all than just hearing me speak. But I know one thing that is of of interest to many folks, as you all I'm sure as well, is the allocation of affordable units that are going to be set forth as throughout a relatively lengthy process. So I will say right now, the state of Connecticut, the Office of Policy and Management (OPM), they are tasked initially with setting forth both the statewide, and this is where it gets a little bit not confusing, but there's just a lot of steps to this. So OPM has to look at and create a statewide housing need number. And that number is not just for affordable units, it's for market rate units as well. It's for both dense units, it's a single family. So they're looking at it really in the larger scope of what is necessary and what's needed in the state of Connecticut over a really 20-year time period. So that number is going to be large. It's going to be big. It's going to not be a number that we are going to be planning for at the regional or local level. So I just want to make sure that's very clear to everyone that that large state number is not the number that then gets put down to the regions. From that larger global number, the Office of Policy Management and the Responsible Growth division within there are going to take that down and look at a 10-year more of a 10-year number of units, specifically looking at affordability units that are needed throughout the state of Connecticut. So that 10-year number will then be what informs the regional allocation. So each of the 9 councils of governments, there's 9 COGs in the state of Connecticut. So each of the 9 COGs will get an allocation of that 10-year affordability goal. And then from there, the COGs, myself and my staff, will work with our municipal members, so Town of Fairfield, City of Bridgeport, towns of Stratford, Monroe, and Easton, and Trumbull, in order to kind of understand what the global need, what the kind of the allocation at the regional level is for 10 years. But then I think it's important to understand that the 10-year number that the COG receives from the state, we're only going to be looking at planning, and the housing growth plans are only 5-year plans. So of that 10-year number, we are going to work with our municipal partners and groups like yourselves within each town to set forth those 5-year affordability targets or goals that is required as part of the housing growth plans. And I met a month and a half ago or so with the Affordable Housing Committee in Easton, which was set up and then kind of went defunct, but is now active again. And I know that was a concern of theirs, is how's that allocation from the region down to each municipality going to happen? I know for the town of Fairfield, when some original legislation was put forth in the legislature back in 2022, I think it was, the town of Fairfield was going to be allocated some 6,400 affordable units that they were supposed to plan for, which I know was a concern of many Fairfield residents for sure. And some other towns in our MetroCog region were also going to be given a very large allocation of units. So one of the things that we've been working on, and we're working with the state of Connecticut as they come up with those larger numbers. But we do have the ability, because we're only looking at a 5-year time horizon, because we have the ability to kind of take that 10-year number that's given to the regions and then distill that down to a 5-year goal. We are not going to, just say we're beholden to a specific number. We're going to look at a number of different factors in coordination. I want to make sure this is clear. This is not the COG doing work and just sending a number down to the town of Fairfield. This is going to be a collaborative process throughout the entire planning process between COG staff, municipal staff, and other stakeholders like yourselves throughout the region. So that was something I wanted to make very clear to everyone I speak with in every town. I'm doing one of these, a similar type of discussion in the town of Trumbull next month. I want to make sure it's very clear that this is not going to be the COG saying, this is what you have to get, this is what you have to plan for, and there's no discussion on that. I think, the town of Fairfield, as you all very likely know, is very well set up and has been doing a really good job of providing the regulatory framework that allows for housing to be built in the town and allows for affordability goals to be included as part of that development. So I would say the town of Fairfield is doing a really great job at trying to address the housing need that they know exists. So in saying that, and if any of you attended the legislative roundtable that we had back in January on this bill, I think it was January, maybe February. one of the things that we talked about, and I know has come up subsequent to that with in speaking with town staff, is, Fairfield wants to make sure that they're not going to get penalized for kind of doing the work ahead of time. And I think that is, and I see some heads nodding. I do apologize I'm not in person because it's always easier to have these discussions in person, but that is something that that will be part of that larger discussion at the regional level in terms of, the allocation of units. But also, I would say the fact that there's a number of developments in the pipeline in Fairfield that have units attached to them, that's not something that will be discounted as part of this larger discussion as well. So I think from one perspective, I want to make sure that you all know that, we will be taking and we will be working with our municipal members and our municipal staff to make sure that we have as much information as possible, and we're going to sit around a table collaboratively amongst all of our municipalities and figure out how to best allocate these targets. But I'd also want to just stress too that the legislation, as it's written, it is not a requirement to build these units. It is it's setting up the regulatory framework and the municipal framework to allow units to be built, but it doesn't require the town to, let's just say there's the allocation to the town of Fairfield is 100 units. It doesn't mean that in 5 years, if you haven't built 100 affordable units, you're going to be penalized. There's going to be parts of the housing growth plans are going to be basically the town and the region collectively and collaboratively coming up with ways in which that affordability target could be reached. But we also are very well aware that the market will dictate what gets built and what doesn't get built. So, and then that was one of the issues I think that people had concerns about the original legislation that was passed in June of 2025 was that, it was to a point requiring the building of those units. And that's not really something that the municipality has a lot of control in unless they're going to start building them themselves, because that is determined by the market. And that's determined by development that can come in and adequately build that and have a return on that investment. So I think that was part of our discussion with legislative leadership was that, requiring these units to be built is not something that the towns have control of. You can set the framework up, but if no one comes in and builds, there shouldn't be a penalty on that. So I think what we have now is a piece of legislation that allows for a really a regionally collaborative discussion and planning process that, I hope really comes up with a strategy region-wide to address housing affordability and accessibility, while at the same time ensuring that no one municipality is overburdened by these goals and is therefore then overburdened by development that they can't that they really can't allow and not allow, but that they can't kind of include with the infrastructure issues that are related to that, with the utility issues that are related to that. So I think, we're going to look at this holistically across all the different kind of varying factors that influence housing development and understand that those are significant and understand and then figure out ways and recommendations to be made that can address those issues while also still allowing the municipalities themselves to have the final control of what gets built where, when, and how to make sure that it is in line with what the municipality wants to see going forward. And just on the timeline piece for your all's awareness, so the state of Connecticut, they have to set the state targets and the regional targets by December 1st of this year. Their intention is to set those targets well before that, so that ourselves at the regional level, working with our municipalities, have a longer timeline to work out the allocations to individual municipalities. That work has to be done by June 1st of 2027. So the allocations will be known, but hopefully well before June 1st. And then one thing I said on my discussion with Easton is, and I said earlier today, is this is not going to be COG staff sitting in a room doing work and telling the town what the numbers should be. My hope is that we're all sitting at a large table like the one you're at this evening, with every municipality there, with their planning staff, economic development staff, first chief elected officials, and we're having a discussion about how this works, so that when we get to those final allocation numbers, it's not going to be a surprise. Everyone's going to understand where those numbers came from, how they were reached, and why it makes sense. So that's really how I see this planning process worked out. We also, just from the actual the housing growth plans that are required both at the regional level and at the local level, with the ability to opt into a regional plan. So by statute and by law, each municipality has to draft their own regional housing or their own municipal housing growth plan. They do have the ability, if they decide to opt in to be part of the regional plan. And we have some funding at MetroCog that's going to help the municipalities and help my staff add additional staff and provide technical assistance and technical support to the municipalities, whether or not they opt into the regional plan or they decide to do it on their own. And I also will say, too, from the allocation perspective, and I don't think we'll get here because I hope to have, as I said, a very collaborative kind of process in allocating those goals. But the municipality, once those goals are set on June 1st, each municipality has the ability to say, you know what, we don't think that's right for us. We believe the number should be, X instead of Y, and provide some backup as to why. And that's a number that will then go to Office of Policy and Management for them to approve. So even if we come up with a regional allocation that sets aside municipal allocations, and the town really is like, that's too many for us, there is a mechanism in the law that allows for the town to say, no, that's too much. We think it should be something different. So there's a lot of steps in the process that allow for changes. Yes, Mark.
Just a quick clarification. When are member municipalities within the MetroCog region required to provide a housing growth plan?
Yeah, I was just getting to that. So the housing growth plans for our region are not due until June 1st of 2029. So we have a very long runway here to get this actual planning work done. The allocations need to be done by next June, but the actual planning work and the adopted plans that then go up to OPM must be submitted by June 1st of 2029. So we have a very long runway on the planning side of this for our region because we are not, they basically separated out the different regions. A few regions have their plans due June 1st of 2028, and the remainder are June 1st, 2029, and we're in that second group.
And did I understand you correctly that if, this committee has had some history and tradition of developing local affordable housing plans, produced several last few years, but did I understand that there might be funding available should we decide to, forego a regional plan, but go it alone and kind of develop our own plan, that there would be assistance provided through the MetroCog?
Yeah, so I haven't yet worked out like how.
Yeah, no, it's a little early for that.
But, one of the things, the bill that was passed did provide additional funding to the COG specifically for housing planning work. So we right now have a job posting out for a housing planner. We are doing interviews actually next week to kind of initiate that. So my hope is we will be bringing on someone specifically for housing. I do have some staff right now that have been working very closely with the other COGs since the bill was passed that are kind of doing the work of that housing planner at the moment. So some of those folks will probably continue to do the work along with this new person. Or if we can't find someone that fits the right mold, then we will have our existing staff kind of transition at least some of them over to more specific housing work and bring someone else on to take some of the capacity off of our other planning work. But yeah, so Mark, we're still kind of working on how that all works out. But, my goal that throughout this entire discussion and with other municipalities is to let you all know that regardless of kind of how we go about this, the COG will be here to provide support and assistance to each municipality in our region as we do this work.
Thanks. Questions? Thank you very, very much for that concise summaries. Guys, do you have questions?
So are there going to be funds available to help build any of the units?
Yes, so that is part of the bill, and that was something that came out of that negotiation period after the veto. So what is in the bill is there will be the creation of a housing growth fund that will be setting aside dollars specifically to help really with the infrastructure pieces around housing. As we know, additional housing requires additional infrastructure, be it road infrastructure, be it utility infrastructure. I know you all are probably very well aware of the trunk line issues on the sewer mains. So those types of things are able to be funded through this housing growth fund, and the eligibility for that fund, as set out in the statute, is that you have an approved housing growth plan at either the regional or local level, depending on which way you have done. and you either opt into the transit-oriented communities portion of the bill, which is kind of some very specific zoning around your TOD areas, or that you opt into the CMDA, the Connecticut Municipal Development Authority. You opt into that program, and if you have an approved growth plan and you're in either the transit-oriented communities opt-in or you're part of CMDA, you are eligible for that housing growth fund, which can fund both infrastructure and potentially subsidize some of the funding for the housing. But that's really the housing development funding is really more of a CMDA funding because they are set up specifically to help support some of the development of the housing itself. So yes, there is funding that will be tied to this. And, as I said before, the town of Fairfield has always been kind of ahead of the curve on a lot of this work. So I don't see the planning work at the local level, especially in Fairfield, being a very big lift for you all.
One other question, Matt, that the need for the housing and the housing type is driven by demographics, and demographics don't change quickly. But currently we have a number of older households, myself included, in 3 to 5 bedroom homes, and they only need 1 bedroom. And there's young families who would like to move into town, but there aren't any 3 to 5 bedroom homes available.
Yep.
So how do you factor in the aging out of my generation, the turnover of those housing units, which will become available? How do they get factored into the local need?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question, and that's something that we've been having a number of conversations with the Office of Policy and Management, who's kind of working on the statewide goals and the statewide housing need, and that's been a very high topic of conversation in those discussions because it's very true. And I think that's one of the things where there's a number of kind of on the planning side, there's a number of ways to factor some of that in. It's obviously hard to know exactly when those houses will turn over. Obviously you can look at kind of age trends and see kind of what the expectation would be. I do think one of the other things that has come up a lot is kind of as you state, the mismatch of households to the houses they're living in. And part of that, to a certain extent, is driven by the fact that there's really not, for maybe someone that was aging into a house that's now too large for them, there aren't really a lot of opportunities to go anywhere else and stay in your community at the moment because there's not enough housing available in a lot of places for that to happen. So people are staying in these larger houses maybe longer than they used to because of the fact that there's not a viable option that makes sense for them in the short term. So why would you give up what you have to have questionable housing that may or may not exist for you? So there's a valid reason to stay in those larger houses and kind of be overburdened by the size of your house because the options for where you would go from there don't necessarily exist in the way and in the accessible way that you would hope for. So that mismatch is kind of looked at the statewide level, and it is also something from a demographic perspective and an age demographic and age population shift perspective that we will be looking at as to how we can utilize that piece of it to make sure that we don't also overbuild as well, because that is a concern that if you start adding too many units all over the place and then you have a shift in that population demographics, then you might have a considerable amount of unused housing, which is not anything that anyone wants either. So it is a give and take, and it's a fine line as you walk that kind of planning work. But I do believe there's a lot of information out there at our disposal to be able to utilize to inform those decisions in a beneficial way.
Other questions? Go ahead, Lynn.
Can I ask?
If quick question. Sure.
I was wondering if you're modeling any of what you're doing and that other states are taking advantage of. Are you following along any successful changes that other states are making?
Yeah, so part of the work that the state is doing right now, a lot of the staff up at OPM is doing a deep dive into what other states that have kind of gone in this same path are doing. The state of Oregon has done a lot of work in this way. The state of New Jersey has to varying degrees of success. So yeah, that is being looked at both at the state level. It is work that my staff is also doing, looking at best practices across the country as to how to how to ensure that the planning work is informed by the best possible data and informed by the best possible input to make sure that, when we get to those planning goals and those recommendations of how to reach those planning goals, that they are reasonable, they are you're able to actually reach them at some point, because it doesn't make sense for anyone, the bill that was never passed through committee, that got a lot of attention in the town of Fairfield, that was going to require the town to build, I think it was 6,400 affordable units over a 10-year period. That's not a viable goal. It might be what some advocacy groups would like to see, but we all know the realities on the ground. You can't fit 6,400 affordable units in the town of Fairfield in the way that it's currently developed. So I think it's really important to make sure as we work through this that the goals and the recommendations that are being developed are actionable, are implementable, because that's really what the ultimate goal of this legislation is, to ensure that there's housing accessibility and affordability throughout the state of Connecticut. And if we end up in a fight about the number of units that are the target and not really focusing on the planning piece to make sure that the regulatory framework exists at the local level to allow for some housing, then we're losing the forest through the trees. And I think it's really important to make sure that we keep the end goal of this, which is creating a framework and creating the ability to have development that makes sense in each municipality in a way that everyone can get behind and be proactively working towards.
Could I just follow up with a definition of affordability, and then I'll stop?
I think maybe we ought to, can we hold that we'll have a discussion here?
Or a link or something, that'd be helpful, because I don't know what you mean by affordable, so thank you.
Okay, we'll address that separately.
Okay.
Lynn. Here's one, Matt. You mentioned that specifically we would be addressing affordability numbers, the 10-year and the 5-year. It seems like you really need to be looking at the big picture before you come up with the affordable. To what extent will you be looking for that sort of detail and color somewhere in the plans?
Yeah, so I think that's going to be part of it. I mean, by law, the plans have to address the 5-year affordability goal, but you make a very good point that you can't really get to that goal without also understanding the more global need for housing in general and what those housing typologies look like. So that will be, from my perspective, that's a huge part of the initial planning work, is understanding what that kind of across all income bands, across all housing types, what that need is across the region. So that is something that we will be doing as part of the larger planning work that will be done around the regional housing growth plans in the municipal one. So certainly that will be taken into account. That is something that we plan to make sure that is part of this larger discussion, because you can't have one without the other.
Anything else before we say goodbye to Matt? And thank you again. This is really informative, I think, and I think we all gained a lot from it.
Yeah, appreciate it, Matt. Thank you.
No, of course, and then I'm happy to, like I said, I hope and I believe this is probably the first of many conversations with you all, and I know Mark will be keeping you all abreast of what we're doing, both at the COG level and at the local level. But we are here. MetroCOG is here to be a resource and a support for the town of Fairfield as we work through this throughout the entire region. So I am happy to have myself or other staff come back at any other point to help continue this discussion going forward.
Appreciate it.
All good.
Thank you.
Thanks much.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Have a good evening.
Look forward to that. Okay. So as the next item, I think we've all introduced ourselves. As the next item, why don't we pick up the minutes of the prior meetings, the 2 minutes of the February 11th meeting?
I'll move that they be accepted.
Yeah, there were a couple of suggestions that Tom Phillips had, Mark. But they're really minor. I mean, like punctuation and so forth. I don't think we need to worry about that here. Any other suggestions?
No.
Second?
Yeah, second.
I'll fix them for him.
Oh, we're good. All in favor then? Okay, approved. Great. We've had our guest speaker. We have a couple of big items that we need to tackle tonight. One has to do with the presentation that we're making next week to Planning and Zoning Commission. And the other one has to do with our workshop on April 29th. So I think we need to spend some time on both of those issues tonight. That is specifically what text we're going to suggest to planning and development, planning and zoning staff that we'll then discuss at this meeting on the 14th, which will be really a concept discussion as opposed to, making a specific recommendation that we're looking for an up or down on. And then we want to talk about the workshop, and that includes, what's the format going to be, what are the logistics going to be, how do we want to promote it, and so forth. So, should we start with the April 14th presentation?
The
then?
time-sensitive one first. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. So in your packet, Emmeline Harrigan, the town planner, and I have been discussing this for some time now, and I shared with her the thoughts from our last meeting, looking at specific sections of our existing regs and proposing some changes both with respect to the inclusionary zoning fee, changing it from $5 to $6 as a starting point for the conversation. Also increasing the threshold requirement, set aside requirement from 10 to 12% townwide, and within the TOD zone from 12 to 15% at 8% of median. And then also lowering the threshold at which the set aside requirements do apply from 10 units to 5. And that was contained in like multiple sections of the zoning regulations, because what they did was they brought everything together, and it's been obviously modified over the last 30 years. So the thought was, let's try to simplify that to some extent and refer back to a section that includes all the affordable housing requirements, so that every time we change it, we don't have to go through multiple sections and make the same changes for fear that we might miss one and then have some disconnect. So what you have before you is essentially what we talked about this prior meeting in March, but reformatted so that the inclusionary zoning requirements that I mentioned are contained within one section of the regs, and everything kind of refers back to it. That's the intent. So I think this is pretty inclusive. It does reflect what we discussed. There are a few other things that we could talk about. We started a conversation this past month about potentially also recommending to the Planning and Zoning Commission some changes as it relates to accessory dwelling units, specifically to allow detached ADUs in zones other than the AAA, AA, and R3 zones, to extend that to other residential districts. And so I included the current language, the current zoning regs as it relates to accessory dwelling units in the packet. And then lastly, we had some conversation about, it's a perennial topic for us, whether we should again allow some additional flexibility for applicants to propose and the commission to review and consider and accept at their discretion a fee in lieu of creating the units either on-site or off-site as relates to for sale. And then if we wanted to open that door and provide that additional flexibility, what is the appropriate amount so that we're getting fair compensation for those units that would otherwise be created? So there's a kind of a threshold question which we debated before. I think it's been very clear the preference not only of this committee, but of the Planning and Zoning Commission is that we want the units. It's not about increasing our housing trust fund. It's we want the units preferably. But there may be circumstances where that's not possible, or maybe it's more desirable to provide, another option. So again, that's something we should discuss. But clearly, what has been mentioned before, if we decide that's something we want to go down that path, then we need to come up with an appropriate formula that would produce a fair, a reasonable compensation for the unit. But, when we do that, we understand that you put money into a trust fund, it's a two-step process. So you get the money, but then you have to figure out ways in which you could deploy that. Either the town or a housing partner, which may need to, similar to what we've done with Habitat, get site control. So it is a much more lengthier process to go about actually producing a unit through that path. Those are the things. I think maybe we start with, just to make sure everyone's still on board with the approach as it relates to inclusionary zoning fee, the threshold. And I know Herb had proposed an alternative for those 5 to 9 unit developments in terms of how we might provide an alternative mechanism. And then, going from 10 to 12 and 12 to 15 within the TOD. So increasing the set aside requirement. So those are the 3 things we've been talking about for like a year plus. And, I think we're well positioned to have that conversation with planning and zoning. I just want to make sure we're still on board with that.
So everybody conceptually is good with the idea of the minimum of 5 as a goal, as a target, and then the higher inclusionary zoning fee. We're suggesting 6. I think we know the number. Ideally, we'd like to be higher, but I think there's been a little bit of resistance in terms of the fact that this is a very public number in the regulations, and that to double it at once might be not so well received. And then to increase the percentage. I mentioned to Mark, this is a kind of a detail. I like the idea of 12 and a half instead of 12, simply because that means for every 8 units, one has to be affordable. I think it's probably a little bit easier for a developer to be thinking like that than to think, oh, wait a minute, I'm building 17 now, can I get that in? Because come up with some odd numbers when you start doing that. But anyway, that's really more of a detail that we can get into potentially next week once we get, the big issues addressed. And
Are we going to present this one, the BMR, the fee in lieu, as something we're recommending? Is that what you're asking?
Let's leave that for later.
Okay.
We'll start with the changes to the threshold. Whether we're going from 10 to 5 or something in between. Increasing the set-aside requirement from 10 to 12 town-wide, which would start then at 5 units or 12.5%. And going from 12% to 15% within the TOD zone. And then also the inclusionary zoning fee. So those are the 3 big changes.
yeah, those are the 3 big ones. And then I think, should we spend some time talking tonight about the others, Mark, or just sort of float those for discussion next week?
I think, again, if we're good with that, then we can move on and have a conversation about whether we should include ADUs or payment in lieu. I do think that we may get questions regarding payment in lieu. There was a question at the RTM meeting the other night from a member asking about whether the town allows payment in lieu to the Housing Trust Fund for developments. And Emmeline was presenting her budget, and she answered that question, basically said no, but we do allow for off-site BMR units to be proposed in lieu of the on-site units, and that was satisfactory in response to that question. So it does come up. But I think I just want to make sure we're good with the first group. We've all talked about it. If you want to make any modifications or changes, right now, we round up. So it's not less than. So even at a 7 unit, you have to still produce 1. 5 units, you'd have to produce 1 because it's not less than. But if you want to propose 12.5%, that's fine. Or if you want to deal with the fractional numbers.
Well, we don't
fine.
need to really decide that tonight, right? I mean, the the thing I think we really want to decide is the big three. And I think we could probably have some conversation next week about what these issues are. Because about half of the towns in the survey we've done use the fractional approach, as opposed to rounding up.
Yeah, my preference would be to come in as a unified position. This is the position of the affordable, this is what we're recommending. Not do a Chinese menu, because then, not that it can't be worthwhile to have that conversation. We did consider this. This is what we're recommending. But yeah, we're trying to get to some consensus around this to make sure that we're all on board before we go forward. Not that, planning and zoning may have their own ideas as to this as well. So I'm sure they will.
You probably already mentioned this, so apologies if I forgot, but when was the last time, best of your recollection, these numbers changed? Has this?
They haven't changed when they were first formulated, pretty much.
Which
I mean,
was? Some time ago.
2018?
28, between 2016, 2018,
It seems very reasonable to be changing them. I mean,
Yeah, and I think we had done some analysis. I think there's a meeting coming up. I'm not sure it's going to take place before the 14th or not, but there's a group of communities that are under the auspices of Fairfield County Center for Housing that, we've challenged the Fairfield County Center for Housing to assist us, because every time we go through this, whether it's us or Stanford, we all go and survey each individual community and say, what are you doing? What are you doing? So we're trying to compare and understand, again, to Lynn's point earlier, best practices within the state, and determine whether or not how effective those changes have been, if there have been any issues. We're always looking for the best way to create the mousetrap. So, but we're going to have this conversation with a much broader group to include, they all show up, Canaan, Darien, Westport, Shelton, other communities, Bradford, to understand what's happening in the Fairfield County environment, specifically with regard to inclusionary zoning provisions. Because it's natural, I would expect the Planning and Zoning Commission to ask, well, how does this compare to neighboring towns? And I think we have done that analysis. It needs to be updated. And hopefully this will be helpful so that we don't have to do all the homework ourselves. But there's always these little nuances in the regs. Some are very complicated. Stanford and Norwalk are many, many pages long and have a very complicated scheme. And it works for them, but it may not be easy for everyone else to implement. So I think that's a natural question. It does compare, I think we're in the ballpark for sure. And it's always the balance that we're trying to achieve here is this affordable units require a subsidy. And either the government is providing that there's public financing that's providing that subsidy, or in our case, by requiring private developers to include affordable units as part of their overall development mix, those market rate units are subsidizing the affordable units. And so as long as the housing market is strong enough and they get enough income from those market rate units to support the affordable units, that works. But at some point that may not work. And if, the more you increase that from 10 to 12 or 12 to 15, has to perform. It has to pencil out. So you do want to make sure that you're not imposing too great a burden on the developer. Otherwise, you won't see any housing produced. And I think this is a fairly modest step. And I think we're definitely within the range of whatever everyone else in the area, especially the ones with stronger housing markets, are doing. So I think we're in good shape there.
And what this will mean now is that it's not, you build 5, you have to build one of those has to be affordable. You build 7, you still want affordable, and 8. You build 9, you've got to build 2 affordable now under this revision. So.
And, again, we will have to see, assuming, again, Planning and Zoning accepts this, approves these changes, we'll see how the market responds. Nothing is permanent, so if we see an adverse impact in an area that we hadn't anticipated, and that we want to make a change, we could always do that. But I do think this is a reasonable request.
This is definitely what we talked about. Do you want a motion to say?
Yeah, that would be helpful. Yeah.
I have a question or want to do the motion, and I can do the question.
I move that Market Herb present this plan as outlined on this exhibit, big X exhibit, to the RTM.
That's the Planning and Zoning Commission, but
Okay, sorry, Planning and Zoning Commission.
And I can second that. And then I can ask my question. So,
all right.
I think these are good. Do we have any like spreadsheet to address? People are going to say, so what's the effect of the change? If we go from $5 to $6, what's that mean?
Yeah, we could do that calculation. We would have that ready.
Yeah, actually, this
Yeah.
exhibit that I haven't given you yet, Mark, but I'll give it. This actually provides those numbers, and we can decide whether or not we want to use this, but
I may not use this particular model.
well, we've got these numbers handy to show what
Share here, Herb.
Yes, no problem.
we got these numbers.
So when we first proposed an inclusionary zoning fee, folks wanted to know what's the likely revenue gain, what income will be generated from it, and we have historical records now
It's illustrative.
dating back multiple years, so we could easily calculate what we consistently see on a basis and aggregate numbers. This is, at a smaller, development scale. And again, if you look at the history in terms of this falls proportionately on larger scale development projects, a lot of which is institutional. Both universities have been on a fairly aggressive capital campaign, making fairly large investments in their facilities, all of which have been captured through the inclusionary zoning fee. And that probably constitutes, the planning director at one point had told me about 60% of the activity, the revenue generated is coming from universities. And I think willingly, because from their perspective, when we first, it was, part of the issue is from an economic development, retention and attraction, trying to provide housing to attract and retain staff, all students. And part of it is housing costs are expensive here. So part of this is you help us solve this problem by contributing funds that we can then deploy to create units locally. So we did get, when it was first enacted, some pushback from the single-family home builders. But again, some of those criticisms and concerns didn't come to pass. I mean, in terms of there wouldn't be any single-family home construction. There's been single-family home construction. So we haven't seen really a drop-off in housing construction, single, two-family, three-family, as a result of the inclusionary zoning fee. It's paid. So the only thing, what's exempt is anything that otherwise contributes to our affordable housing inventory. So if you are subject to an inclusionary zoning requirement, you have to produce a unit or more on-site or off-site, or you're a government-assisted project like Fairfield Housing Corporation, they're exempt from the inclusionary zoning fee. This just captures anything that is new construction or building additions that does not otherwise contribute to meeting our affordable housing needs.
Can you, I can't figure this out. Can you explain this?
Yeah, I don't want to spend too
I think
much.
he was trying to calculate what that fee would be on a project.
So in other words, this is right, if you build one unit right now, and you've got a $600,000 structure, you pay $3,000 in fees. Under the new proposal, you'll pay $3,600. So there's a that goes from $5 per thousand to $6 per thousand, so it's sort of a 20% increase.
Okay.
And then if you look along that line, you'll see basically what this is an estimate of what the extent to it of out-of-pocket to address affordability the developer goes when he or she goes from 4 to 5. So at 4, you're for a 4-unit development, $600,000 building, which admittedly is now unfortunately modest structure.
Is that building cost, 600,000, or is that market?
That's the development cost.
Okay.
Yeah, and how this is, the fees are imposed at time of building permit application. It's based on the estimate of the permit value, which is viewed by the building official. You see some variation in terms of that.
So in other words, there's a big increase in what I as
That's not what it's going to sell for, I can tell you that.
a big increase in terms of what I as a developer I'm going to have to fork up to build that, that 5th unit, right? So there's a real disincentive to go from 4 to 5 under this proposal. But I mean, we do know that a number of other towns do have a threshold of 5. So it's something that we're striving to make work. The 5A was this was the idea of the alternative fee. The alternative fee. And again, this is all just illustrative, so there's no real magic these are numerically developed. There's a foundation, but there's nothing sacrosanct about these numbers. But the idea of 5A was, this is maybe an alternative if the full unit doesn't work, and so forth and so on. So that's really what this is. That's what the top is. And then the bottom.
You're saying if they build 5 units and their total costs are $1.5 million, then they have to build another unit for $1,150,000?
It means that's what they would incur in terms of charge. Yes, for one unit. If we're talking about a $1.5 million. Again, this is an estimate based in terms of the maximum we can charge to the affordable buyer. It's an estimate here, but the estimate is that for that $1.5 million unit, that the cost would be of $1.15 million
For the affordable unit?
to build the affordable
Okay.
unit. The extra cost, the affordability cost would be that. And again, think of these as illustrative. They're ballpark numbers. So, and then the bottom of this, the last two exhibits basically show the difference between the current roundup method versus what a fractional charge would be. And I agree. If we can if the roundup method works and we get more units that way, that's all great. But I guess we can think of the fractional as well as these alternative charges up at the top of this exhibit as maybe a backup strategy if we find, in fact, that we've been maybe a bit too aggressive in our earlier throws. But again, if we can get the developers to build the units, we should try to do it. That's all. So we have consensus then in terms of this?
You guys want to vote on it? You got a motion to approve?
Motion and a second. We have second. All in favor? Okay, great. Then
The second one,
yes.
well, you want to go talk about ADUs, you want to talk about payment in lieu first?
Well, we want to talk about both of them, right?
Okay, yeah, which one do you want to go first?
So, well, Jackie brought up the
Payment in lieu?
the payment in lieu. So I don't think we're ready to suggest a specific percentage at this point.
Yeah, it's been some time since we did this analysis, and going back through my notes, yeah.
I'm curious, Marcus, why we're even talking about it. This has been kicking around for a couple of years. Nobody seems to be really excited about doing it. And I'm just wondering why it keeps bubbling back to the surface.
Whatever happened to the development that they were going to do this?
In Southport, yeah.
Well, there were a couple in Southport, and one, they came back and proposed to provide off-site EMR in lieu of the on-site streaming. And, at the time, we had supported that, and we had also recommended that it not be, it be at the discretion of the Planning and Zoning Commission, and not be so rigid in terms of the factors that they would consider, but there would be some consideration. Now, we haven't had an application yet, and so, developers, like everyone else, is trying to figure out, well, what do I need to do to get the yes? What would be acceptable as an off-site unit? And there's really no way to know because it's an elected board. So you just have to propose something and have them say thumbs up, thumbs down. And that's what we've told them. And there is very limited inventory in Fairfield, part of why housing costs are what they are. And so he's struggling a bit to identify, he's tried to identify several. And his thought was, well, I'm not going to be able to provide something geographically proximate to my development site, because that's even a smaller subset of very limited inventory, if at all. So in lieu of that, I'm going to provide double the units. So instead of 1 for 1, I'm going to provide 2 units for 1. And again, that was something we discussed. There might be benefit to the town. Obviously, the more units, the better, right? They do a 2 for 1 swap. The fact that they're being deeded to the town or some other entity in perpetuity, we have the affordability restrictions in place forever, not 40 years. So, I can see the appeal. And to Steve's point, and you get the units. It's not like put money into a bank and at some later point we figure out how to actually produce a unit based on that. So it comes up, Steve. It comes up not just from developers, it comes up from other members of elected and appointed boards and the public. And so, I don't think we should dismiss it out of hand, but I know how the group feels, I think.
Yeah, and this really doesn't have anywhere near the urgency as the
would
big
agree.
three.
Yep.
So,
I will continue to represent what I understand the consensus on this board is. We would prefer the units. And if there's really truly exigent circumstances that would force us to review this, then we will do that. But, where we left off, even in terms of the formula, we would need to tweak that to get close to what we think is an appropriate valuation of those units. So we dispense with that.
we dispense with that. But on the ADUs, Emmeline actually brought the subject up to us in terms of do we want to address this next week? And as Mark said, the core of the issue is that right now one can build a detached ADU in the AAA, AA, or Residence B districts. Residence B is the smallest of those. It's 20,000 square feet, 20,000 square foot lot. So anything below that, which we're talking Residence A, which is 9,375, and then B and C are below those. But for Zone A, for instance, Deb, you brought up the issue last week, I guess the concern about the fact that you would have maybe last month, a smaller lot proximate to a larger lot within Zone A, and it might produce, whereas it might work on the larger lot, it might not work so well on the smaller lot. I think that's a reasonable, concern, and maybe one we should talk a little bit more before we make any firm proposal. Now, there is a requirement currently that any detached ADU has to meet the zone requirements. So a Zone A detached ADU, if it were allowed, it would have to be 9,375 square feet. In fact, a large percentage, last time we checked, maybe even a third of Zone A lots are non-conforming. So that might take care of some of your concern, but I'm not sure if we know off the top of our head how we would.
Well,
address this.
I think what prompted this, again, when we had proposed modifying the accessory dwelling units, which that was 3 years ago, 4 years ago, maybe longer.
It was 5 years.
5 years ago? Okay, time flies.
Initially, the initial revision.
But there was actually quite a bit of conversation on the Planning and Zoning Commission at that time whether they should go further. We had not proposed going further in terms of the detached, but there were at least several members that were expressing interest, allowing detached units on smaller lots in other zones, other than the 3 that are included. So I think it has been a conversation. There have been, and folks have gone the variance route. I'm not sure we get a lot of them. But, again, if you see a trend there in terms of people exercising a variance, which is, more subjective, whether it's a hardship or not, it's really up at the whim of the planning and the Board of Zoning Appeals, really. Maybe we should consider it. But again, to your concern, it does need to conform to the other requirements within that zone, whether it's minimum lot size or setbacks or other requirements. It would have to be a conforming lot in order for this to apply.
What's the smallest lot that you can do it on today? R3?
Yeah.
Which is how big?
20,000.
20,000.
20,000?
I didn't bring the whole regs. They have a nice little
Box.
now. You can see it all.
Do
Am I
you,
looking at the right thing?
do you hear complaints about people coming in and saying, I'd like to build a detached
Well, I had
ADU?
one today, actually, and I had to inform, and I said, but his was a duplex, and I was like, I'm sorry, even if this were allowed, you can't, he was trying to do he was trying to do a self-contained ADU in a duplex, which you own half. And I was like, it only applies to single-family homes in a Residence B zone. So you get these all the time where folks are trying to push the envelope a little bit. I do think that we see applications through CPA or CPA for a zone ADUs. So it's not, I don't know if it's a lot, because as we've seen from our ADU workshops, it's not inexpensive to build an ADU. So it applies to a certain subset. It really would allow people to maybe age in place, provide housing for a loved one. Some people do use it for rental income purposes, but it's a very small group. I mean, we have maybe a dozen a year, so that's one a month that come through. So, and we've got, 200, somewhere between 250 and 300 ADUs in town, legal ADUs. So it's not a large segment. I guess before, this group has been interested in providing a little extra flexibility for accessory dwelling units. It's not so much the affordable piece, it's really just providing a range of housing options.
You're saying 1,500 is the minimum it can be? Minimum size?
That should be the maximum.
Oh, that's the maximum?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. I was gonna say
Yeah.
1,500 is pretty big.
It's a very generous, 15, it has to be subordinate to the house to be an ADU, the main structure. 40% or 1,500 square feet. So it's a very generous ADU.
Yeah, we actually had proposed 1,000 square feet,
They went higher.
and they went up to 1,500, which is very, very large.
Big, that's huge,
Yeah.
yeah.
So we don't have to do anything. If we can continue to look at it. We can broach the topic that, we've considered, extending the detached option into other residential districts. But we don't have a specific recommendation.
Do those numbers go towards affordable housing?
No, they won't unless you have a deed restriction in place. And it's really, I don't know that anyone in their right mind would self-impose a 40-year restriction on their house to provide an ADU. So, it only works, it works in a couple towns where otherwise it's illegal to build an ADU unless you do that, but kind of the horse has left the barn here. We allow ADUs legally, and you're not going to get people to, unless you pay them for that. I think that's the other option, which is you give them some kind of incentive to put that restriction in place for 40 years. So some kind of tax abatement, or you pay them some kind of subsidy to do it, but I don't see anyone else doing that.
Yeah, we do you can have a third person in the affordable unit, otherwise limited to 2 persons. But that's hardly a big incentive to.
Yeah, most people are using ADUs to provide housing for some people they know. It's usually an elderly parent or a child. It's somebody that's related.
You can generate income.
And there are, we've seen more recently where people are using it to generate income, but it keeps them housed as well. Yeah, it's not, we looked at that for a while as to whether or not we could use that to get some points out of it, but it just never, anyone I know that's successfully done that is Trumbull. And Trumbull didn't allow ADUs until they declared a general amnesty, provided you entered into this restrictive covenant, and they got the state to accept it. But 40 years is a long time.
Well, what if the time you owned the house went into that number? In other words, if you've lived in a house 20 years, you're halfway in.
Yeah, you are, but you have to do it at that point in time and agree to restrict it for the next 40 years. So
Plus 40. You
can't go back retroactively. Yeah.
Lacks creativity, doesn't
Yeah.
it?
So there's better ways for us to document our affordable housing. But it does provide housing that would be affordable to some.
I mean, we could look at this maybe in more depth when we do our real middle housing study.
Okay.
Our zone B and C study, that we're going to tell them, I think, that we're not ready for that, but know it's coming. So hopefully later in the year, we'll be ready to make a proposal on zone B and zone C and anything else that falls within the middle realm.
Yep.
So that would be probably a good time to pick up the
Yeah, there's
ADU expansion.
3 things there. We've looked at the minimum lot size and other requirements in the residence B and C zones. And as you recall, we did some analysis where there's a good percentage, over 50% of the duplexes in a residence B zone are non-conforming. So they're on smaller than a 9,000 square foot lot. In fact, the conversation I had today was a gentleman who was on a 7,600 square foot duplex lot. So it's pervasive. So I guess if you have that percentage, it's like, why a 9,000 square foot lot? Could we do it on a 7,000 square foot lot, 6,000 square foot lot? So we need to do some further analysis to what that cutoff would look like to answer their questions. What's the impact of this change? So that applies to the B and C. And then the other thing that we've done, which I've had some conversations, you recall with Peter Stofa and that development on Royal, he could legally build under existing zoning 3 units, and we said, okay, it's a 15,000 square foot lot. You could build a single family and duplex. We'll allow you to build 5, provided one of those units is affordable. Well, again, you could look at that same scenario and say, well, is 15,000 square foot the right size to participate? Could you do 4 on a 10,000 square foot lot? So you can make those changes too. We've had some conversations with some folks to see, and again, one of the lots we looked at was, gee, it would be a shame to put back a duplex on this lot. You could do more. You could do double that, and it would perfectly fit in. So the same scenario where you can build 4 instead of 2, but one of those would have to be affordable. So that's the other thing as part of the B and C conversation. So I think we're good with the zoning discussion. We're just going to go ahead with the.
Focus on the big three and then
Yep.
see where it takes us. They'll probably have questions that'll lead into some of these other issues. But we'll let them know that the middle housing piece is coming. That'll be stage 2. Okay, so maybe we can gravitate then to the workshop.
Yep. So we do have a date and a location. So we're on the 29th of April. We're at the museum, Fairfield Museum and History Center. 7 o'clock, I think, is our proposed time. So we'd probably look for an hour, hour and a half workshop with some time for questions at the end or some kind of breakout session, as we talked about. But, we need to kind of develop not only the program, but the marketing, because we're at the 8th of April already. So
3 weeks in a
we
day.
kind of I would like to probably be able to announce this next Monday and then start doing some marketing around it. We're kind of behind the 8 ball a little bit. And, I can certainly, there's been a couple different thoughts here. One is, try to make sure everyone has a common vernacular understanding of affordable housing, the needs and what's required and what the town's been doing about it. And I can certainly use the presentation I did at the Bigelow Center that Jackie had me do a condensed version of that to kind of explain, kind of the demographics, some of the things that Steve mentioned. We see that mismatch in terms of, the large percentage of houses in Fairfield have 3 or more bedrooms, but, a large segment of our population are 1 and 2 person households. So there's a mismatch between the housing supply and the household types that we have now. It's not so many large families, household size has gone down. So we could look through some of those demographic, and then that informs kind of the housing needs piece and review kind of what the town's been doing in this regard, provide some case studies and do some question and answer. And then I know Herb, you had suggested, we had some success with previous workshops where we had some, interactive engagement with those attending, which I thought, was really, you think about housing in a different way if you think about the housing that you've lived in over your lifetime and the housing that you might need in the future and whether that's represented within the community in which you live. And assuming everyone wants to stay in Fairfield because it's the greatest town in the world, we want to provide that option. So I thought that was a really good exercise we've done a few times. And so I think you had some thoughts about maybe replicating that in some way.
Yeah, something like that. What I had specifically was sort of throwing out just for us to think about is to get people to be thinking about what they think their Fairfield, their preferred living option might be 5 years from now or 10 years from now. And give us a little bit more color on that, in terms, do you want to own or rent? Do you want to live in a specific type of location? What kind of size unit or whatever are you looking for? And how do we get there? How might can we enumerate actions that maybe we as a town need to take to make that a reality or give greater likelihood of that becoming a reality? and then maybe report back. That each table could report back on what they learned. But that's just a thought. I mean, I think the idea, as we said, the idea of having this being interactive and having people participate in the potential solution is really good in multiple ways. It gets them engaged. We might even build some housing advocates in the process, and we find out what people think. What are they really looking for? What concerns them? And then another thing is if we can get from them a sense of what they're looking for from us. I mean, what information do they need about what's currently going on, what's contemplated? Again, we talk about this gap between what we sort of know and what people on the ground seem to know. And sometimes it seems to be kind of wide, not because we haven't worked hard at trying to narrow it, but it just seems like it's kind of there's a wide information gap. How do we bridge that?
Yeah, so one is the more traditional where you have somebody or a panel that imparts knowledge, information, then you have questions. And that can be useful. Another one is more, you have a very shorter presentation that kind of sets up the breakout session so that they have enough information that they can have an informed conversation, right, within their group, and then people are more engaged in that process. So either one would be acceptable.
I remember
less work for me, more work for you guys.
I remember I asked you when you gave your presentation, it was packed. There was like 60 people there, and there were so few questions. I really thought people would kind of come in fired up, and this is the senior center, come in and sort of say like, why are they building this and this?
We had that, but it was a lot of conversation before the presentation actually started or during the break.
So that's what I was wondering. That's what I would have expected people would have been asking,
Yeah.
and they didn't in the session, but I guess they asked privately.
Yeah, some people, and you do want it to be constructive. I mean, you want. Sometimes you have some folks who can kind of take you down a path, and everything kind of spirals from there. So I do think you do need to provide a little bit of a buffer to keep things constructive. Otherwise, it just ends up with people complaining about stuff, right? So,
Right.
That's not really helpful. And everyone feels bad after you're done because everyone is depressing. So we'd like to be able to impart some information and then get people to help us figure out what they need and what kind of things that they're looking at. That I do think that's helpful. I just think that's a little harder, and it does require some folks within this group. I'm sure we can recruit some other folks as well to kind of play the facilitator role. You have to be out there and make sure that somebody's watching the time, everyone has an opportunity to talk. Report out. It does require a little bit more engagement from this group too, I think, rather than just having me drone on or M-line talk.
One of the advantages of giving a less than completely detailed talk up front is get people hungry for more information. And we have talked about doing this on a periodic basis, maybe once several times a year, hopefully going forward. So we don't need to make people experts in that first meeting. In fact, it might almost be contrary to our objectives to make them experts, because we don't want them going away thinking, oh, I know it all now. So, all right, if we have 50 people there, we've educated 50 people to a point. But I think if we can get people wanting to learn more and maybe dispersing this information throughout the community, and getting them interested and excited, maybe we're better off. But as Mark said, we'd probably need to be at these tables and, maybe being the facilitator, if you will, and answering questions burning questions that people have that come up.
Well, I'll probably start with who's available on the 29th, and are you comfortable playing that role? So I think we should, if with appropriate marketing out there, we should get 50 to 100 people. Probably close to 50 to 60, I guess. So you have small tables and maybe 8 people per table. We're gonna have to have some folks amongst us to help move the conversation along. So I'm just thinking logistics of it. I do think that is a good idea. You just want to make sure initially you set the table with some information so that people can have an informed conversation. They're not, again, things can kind of like, what about this development? I don't like that. So it's like you want to keep it on topic. That's what the facilitator would have to.
I like your idea, Herb. I think that's a good idea. That sort of breakout session with that's the question. What do you need in 5 years for your housing? What needs do you have? That would, I think, get some discussion going.
And how do we kind of, okay, this is what I need, and now, how do we get there?
Right,
And maybe we
right.
get some conversation on that as well.
Yeah, I think that's good. And then have, Mark do the introductory information.
And then do we come back as a group after? Is that what you foresee to talk about?
Well, there's usually a report out at the end. The groups share what they've discussed, and then that's written down somehow, recorded. So, and then, part of it too could be setting up from, this is not supposed to be a one-off. So you're then maybe getting some idea of what other topics people are interested in talking about. So that might inform future conversations and who we might have in to talk about that.
So like 20-minute presentation, 20-minute discussion, 20-minute wrap up.
That's about it, yeah.
Kind of thing.
I mean, we probably need the 90 minutes, everything considered. But
30.
We'll get them out of there by 8:30.
Yeah, you have some, you want to have a little bit of fluff because it.
Then time to get a cookie and a water, whatever we have.
I would love to weigh in on this a little bit. I mean, I'm your demographic, I think, who would attend this, one of the older people. My son might be a younger person. So we're caught in this quagmire, living in a house on one person. I have a shed in the back that could become an ADU. I don't know if it would qualify based on this discussion. But I think the creativity that we need to solve this problem is a nationwide thing. It's not just us. But from what I've heard tonight, the things that are happening within the state and within this room is really fascinating. And it feels to me, coming in, sitting here with all of you, is that I've learned that there's an organization inside an organization inside of an organization in towns trying to connect to make this happen. And I don't understand it, obviously. I barely knew what that man was saying, but I could feel the energy of what is happening. And, I know, well, I mean, I think the Russian doll of affordable housing being on the outside, and it's something I heard tonight that triggers me a little bit, and that is the market will determine what gets built. And what I would say is what I would love to hear from you guys is a little more, and I call it third grade level because I'm a digital marketing person and that's all we have time for. But a third grade level of what's going on here. Because I think Fairfield leads the state, maybe the country, in some of these things that happen in our town. It's a high active volunteer, intelligent group of people who want to maintain the character of the town. But what I hear when I'm outside is another developer is tearing down a building and, there's nowhere to park and oh my God, and then what's going to happen? And I think there's so much going on here that most of us, and I consider myself pretty involved. I've lived here 28 years. I've owned my home. And so I feel like I'm not that naive, but what you're talking about tonight is like, I would like to know about it if I came to a workshop You might just start right there with telling people, here's the Russian dolls of where we're going and how the decisions we make at this table tonight affect us upstream and downstream. But the point you made, is your name Steve?
Yes.
Steve, you made earlier, is I'm living in a house, it's too big for me, and where am I going? And the reality is 55 community, we don't have that. Or CCRC, which is where you buy into an apartment type situation where you never leave. At least you're not aware you're leaving. And so, I don't want either of those. I want to live in intergenerational community where we meet in the garden and have a hot dog or whatever. So I'm preparing a report I'd like to show you guys about that. But in terms of this workshop, I think what's actively happening without the jargon, because I don't know what a BMR is. I know what an ADU is because I almost have one in my backyard. I'm going to add a toilet and call it an ADU. And, so my son who's getting married could have babies in the house, and then I'm in the backyard going, oh, I'm not in a CCRC that I can't afford anyway, or a nursing home or whatever that I don't have the money for. But if I didn't have that as an option and I have my equity in my home, it's not the whole market value. So I'm lucky enough to get the break on the taxes. So I feel like I need to be part of the solution if I could give any input.
I think if we think of this as being meeting number one,
Yeah.
setting up meeting number 2 and number 3.
Yeah.
I think we can move to those kind of solutions.
Right.
And so, let's say Deb is the moderator at table 1, and there are maybe 6 or 7 other people there. There are going to be people that have different needs. So somebody will have a couple people probably have your issue, other people have another issue, and I think it'll be Deb's role to really speak to both of those, or maybe several different points of view, so we get a flavor for the fact that people have these different points of view when you give your download presentation.
I just think
And then to
that,
capture some good notes,
Yeah.
so we come away with a real flavor for what people are telling us, how many people are saying this, how many people are saying that, and so forth.
but I think that what you're doing already, people don't understand.
Yeah.
I've been watching it on YouTube. I've been reading about it. And I still have I wouldn't say I don't have a clue. I think I'm a pretty educated person, but there's so much jargon and there's so many things that your intellectual capital is yours. And then by the time it gets out to they're tearing down the coffee shop, people are like, and where you could come to this meeting and say, here's what happened. Ned Lamont vetoed this because this reason. That was news to me. I didn't understand that. Who's going to be able to make that happen? There's money set aside for planning. There's money set aside. All that stuff that you've been involved with, we don't really know on the outside.
Some of that's going to come out in Mark's.
I think it could be the whole
20 or
thing is what I'm
25.
saying, is all I'm saying.
Well, the only thing is that I think if we try to tell them all, give them all the answers, we're going to take an awful lot of time.
Oh, no, I agree with the 20 minute.
But I think that'll be a really good installment to address those concerns, and then they'll pick up more of that in meeting 2.
Right.
I mean, I don't think it probably is the right thing for us to say, don't believe these other voices. We're doing all these good things. Let them figure that out for themselves, if that in fact is
Right.
the case.
Right.
But I think we can make a start to this on April 29th. anyway.
There's so much behind it that I think that people take for granted. Obviously, there's only so much you can close that gap. But I'm just really impressed with the amount of detail you have and the planning and the years ahead and the people that bring you stuff. Just, I don't know. It's got to go. What's in the paper is too late, is really what I'm trying to say. So what you have here is 5 years ago or whatever, you know what I'm saying? And I think it's powerful.
You're only getting a very small part of the story typically in the.
Right. But I feel comforted by knowing what you guys are doing and the connections you're making with the towns and the state and everything like that. It's very assuring to me, who has nowhere to go, really. And I'd probably die in that house because, it's what I can afford.
It's a lot of us.
And I would rather have my son have his family and grow up in the same way he grew up here in this town and have the fine education and all that. And so, I appreciate you letting me sit in on this meeting, and I hope I can make a contribution, and I don't know how to do it.
Keep
but-
coming to these meetings. You can come on the 29th if you can.
Okay.
So are you good with, is that what we're thinking now? A half-hour presentation, a half-hour breakout session, half-hour conversation at the end, or 20 with some?
Well, and let's
gaps in
figure if we've got 6 tables, allow a minute or two for Deb and the other table speakers to give a download. So let's work that in there somehow.
So my responsibility would be to try to craft
Word it back.
presentations so that people come into that conversation, to Lynn's point, with some less jargony but more common knowledge
Simple.
around this issue, so they can participate fully in that. And then you would, I'm assuming would set up the breakout sessions, give them their task and what they're expected to do. And then individuals within the committee would then be at those sessions. Maybe we'll have to recruit a few more people like Emmeline and some other folks that we could have there. And then we report it out and next steps. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, and when I use the word download, I mean sort of a sense of the table. So we get a real flavor for what people are, different points of view and thoughts that are coming from the table. And we try to get some notes in the process. I think so. And I think my own experience, doing a questionnaire, a very brief questionnaire, could be really valuable for us going forward. If we could get people to tell us who they are, maybe where they live, what their email address is, and answer a couple of questions like, what did you learn tonight? What else do you need to learn to really feel like you've got the picture? Getting to Lynn's points. What further do you think the town can do to inform residents? Just a couple of questions we can pull together. And I volunteer to be the person who tries to not let anybody leave without
Doing our questionnaire.
filling out a questionnaire.
I can be there on the 29th.
We should have them on the tables,
We would.
Oh, yeah,
We would. We'd have all that prepared.
I think what would be helpful for me is, and maybe for everybody, is to have an outline or something like that for the facilitators. Bullet,
We would
what do we
do that.
want to hit on so that when we report back, we've all tried anyway.
We're on the same sort of
To
topic.
hit
Yeah.
on the same issues.
I think we could do that too. And that would be
Mark, do you
reasonable.
recall what Glenn asked a series of questions, or posed a series of questions when we did the last affordable housing plan? And one of them was, where do you see yourself living? But do you have a summary of all of those questions? Because they were all very good, I thought.
I have a lot of that. I don't know if I have everything, but the first time we did this, it was an individual exercise. It was mounted around the room. People went and put dots on something. Remember that? Mm-hmm. And then we had a conversation prompted by that. But I think it was helpful for people to go, and it was explained as people came in, here's what you're supposed to be doing. People participated, and I think it was very helpful, again, to ground the conversation. People don't typically, they live in a variety of different housing over the course of their lifetime. You don't just live in a single-family home from the minute you were born to the minute you die. At some point, you went away maybe to school and you lived in an apartment, that type of thing. So I think when people think about that, it broadens people's horizon. Then you ask the next question, where do you think what kind of housing do you think you'll need in the next 5, 10, 15 years? And then the third question is, this type of housing, does this exist? And so if it doesn't, then that helps policymakers figure out, well, we've got a gap here. We should be trying to figure out strategies to create this type of housing. We kind of know this intuitively, from anecdotal evidence, but it is a very useful exercise in terms of opening up a conversation about housing generally and talking about a diverse range of housing options that allow people to stay in the community. And that's really what this is about, not.
Really, that's what it's about.
Hi, may I ask a question?
Sure, Craig.
Hi, Herb, Mark, everybody. This question is for Herb. I'm just curious, when you're talking about this being a series of workshops, and you mentioned a couple of times that one of the things you would leave them with is next steps. I'm curious what next steps you're envisioning. I guess not that I have to completely understand it. It's not my committee, and I'm not on. But I'm a little confused about what the objectives of this series of workshops is. Is it to enhance understanding? Is it to have a ongoing group that provides input into decision making and policy making? It seems I'm a little confused, and I'd love to be able to communicate to the working group I'm on at the RTM what the purpose of these workshops really is.
Well, I mean, we haven't talked about this at length, Craig, but we did think, rather than think of this as being a once and done type session, that this is such a complicated topic, so many levels to it, that we wouldn't make everybody an expert in the first session. It would almost be better to help them phase in their knowledge. So that would be one reason to have maybe 3 sessions a year, whatever we can manage. Also, things are changing, so there's always new information to report on as well. But I think we thought that, at least I thought, that one byproduct of this would be to develop more people who were interested in housing, interested in speaking up about what their housing needs were and the needs of their neighbors and others, and become, part of the process, part of the engaged public that's speaking about the fact that, hey, we don't have everything we need. We need to be looking at making some adjustments, some adaptations. We can't just accept everything the way it is now, that's going to be this way forever. Beyond that, I'm not sure we really have thought this thing out beyond that.
The other thing is, I was hoping that they could inform us as to what their wants and needs are.
So
Oh,
then
absolutely.
is it fair to say that it's not really about, for them, next steps? It's more about, here are some options and ways you could learn more and get involved as a citizen in issues of importance to you. Is that more of a fair?
I think that's a big part of it, but also we will probably learn more about information that they need. So what I've learned, I think we may have talked about this, is that when we've had discussions with residents, groups of residents, even realtors about what's going on in the community, that there seems to be a real gap between, they're not, what's been approved or what's being built versus what they're aware of. So I think one of the things for us to take away from this is how might we better inform the public,
Definitely.
as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think the term that threw me was next steps.
Yeah, I didn't mean.
Okay, I didn't mean to.
No, that was a good question, actually.
Confuse me.
Yeah, that's a very good question.
Okay, so it's not really next steps. It's
Continuing.
Continuing
to
process.
be continued. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Sure, absolutely.
Well, is that what the feeling of the group? That's what direction we're going in. I do think it's a more, people like to get information different ways, but I do think it's helpful to break it up a little bit and get people involved in an exercise that might, help them understand better the topic, as well as, things that they're hearing from their people seated at their table, that type of thing. So I do think it's a useful thing to do.
Well, I think even if you got ahead of it from a PR perspective, it would help people feel like they had more input, than the buildings coming down.
What we see is people engage in this issue when it directly affects them.
Right.
And so we've been struggling to talk to people when it's not, happening right next door to them, so that they have a better understanding of what's going on within their community. And it's a tough one because people live busy lives, so it's very natural.
So we'll use the term next steps in terms of what we have to do to get ready for the 29th. So I think we need to.
Well, we're going to have to talk because we need to come up with, some stuff pretty quick. I mean, I can pull together a 30-minute presentation. I think I'm fine with, though, I'm sure we could pull together a workshop, but I'm more to Lynn's point, we have to come up with something that we can use for marketing purposes to get people excited or interested enough that they come to the meeting. So part of it is crafting, something that captures what we're going to talk about, but also, entices them to come. There's a hook there. There's some interest, something that sparks their curiosity. So
I have to tell you, I know a lot of people whose kids are living with them right now. So I don't know, that might, I mean, they're adults,
yeah,
and they're, in between here and there, whatever they're doing. But we've raised some pretty great kids in this town. If they came back to this town, it would really be great.
yeah. Can we find housing for them?
Right.
Exactly.
Right. Let them bring their brain trust back and figure it out with us. That could be the hook.
So that's the next thing.
So we'll work on that, and we're going to keep everybody plugged in, not wait until the 29th
No.
to tell you what your mission is. So we'll be in touch.
Mark?
Also, Brian, any guidance you wanted to offer us beyond this?
Guidance? No.
What are you guys nuts? No.
I mean, are you comfortable with this direction?
Yeah, no, I've always been supportive of educating all our neighbors, essentially.
And you're on the board of the collective, so kind of looking at things from a very big picture.
Yeah, we today and we had a working group there today, and we were discussing changes statewide as a result of the new housing bill and Fairfield was called an anomaly, so in a good way, but it's like, well, this is kind of stuff we're talking about the changes in zoning that was kind of embedded in that law, and people are like, it's not going to happen for like 5 or 10 years. I'm like, well, for better or for worse, I've been amazed at the movement we've had in Fairfield, and they're like, yeah, well, that's Fairfield. so pat yourselves all on the back, but I hope we can be an example for the rest of the state.
Hopefully that gives us some leverage with the rest of the state as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, thanks, Brian.
Mark?
I think we can probably leave this topic. Craig? Yeah.
I'm just going to ask Mark, once there's something documented about on the workshop, basically time, place, this is generally what we're going to do. If you could send that to me, I'd appreciate it, because then I'll forward it on to everyone in the
You will certainly get
working
this.
group. Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would hope that we finalize all these logistical details by the end of this week
I think we need to.
and have everything ready to go out on Monday.
Yeah, because we want to try to get into the first select person's newsletter, and the Bigelow people have a 7,500 person mailing list. They tell me we'll try to get it to them and others that we can, but certainly get it to you guys.
Yep. And we'll probably, go through something where we're tracking attendance, RSVPs. We'll probably, so we just know how many people are coming. We may have
I'm
to.
glad you're doing this. Thank you.
Yeah. So the other thing, we left off on our calendar, which is very full, by the way, is the 23rd of April is the Aging in Place Fair at the Bigelow Center. And I wasn't sure if, I think I've asked you this multiple times, so I apologize. Do I need to get a table for us, or do we have a table, or?
Well, I've told them that, I've told them you need a table.
Okay.
And I've told them that if there's going to be a Fairfield Senior Advocates table, that it should be proximate to
Next door.
to your table.
Yeah.
And I think you had suggested maybe there could be a combined table. We'll work that out, but there definitely will be a table.
Okay.
For
It's 5 to 7, so anyone that has some, I know Jackie, you were at the last year.
Yeah, I can't be there this year, but
So anyone who would like to help man our booth, that's great, because I know Sonia Hine from my office usually is there to talk about our rehab program and our handyman program, which are important resources, particularly to seniors, to help them tackle minor repairs and major improvements around the house to keep them housed. And she can't make it because it's her birthday, so I'm not making her work on her birthday. So I'll be there in her absence.
Okay. We'll
But other folks are welcome. So we'll have, that information as well as ADUs and some other material from our office.
all good. So we have a few other items, Mark. I guess we wanted to try to wrap up. I'm not sure we need 45 minutes to do it, but
Good.
I think we want to try to get people out of here in a few. But you want to go through your
Yeah, just
Accelerated
briefly.
drill.
So we do track residential developments that have been approved. This information is posted on the town's website. Lynn, I'm happy to provide a link to you, but I think one of the things we'll be doing, and this tracks them based on their status and likelihood to get built, because some projects never get built. So we do need to understand that. There really isn't any change from the report I shared with you last month. We do update it. If there's any change, we'll update it, provide that information to all of you and post it on the site. But one of the things we probably want to end with, or part of the presentation for this workshop, is additional resources, because we do get these questions. I get questions all the time about, and ones in your inbox too, for, hey, I'm looking for affordable housing, where can I find it? And we do maintain a list of units and contact information. Not that there are units to be had right now, as some have waiting lists, most do not. But we also tell them as units are built where they can keep track of that. Because we do post availability when units start to advertise availability, when they're in the process of getting their certificate of occupancy, they'll start their pre-lease up. And we post that information to the website on news and information. So if you sign up, you'll get a notation that says there's been a change to the website. And then you have to go there. It doesn't give you the link, but you have to go and it'll tell you what the new information is. So that's the best advice we can offer, but we get those calls like every week.
And Mark, we got the moratorium starting last March?
Yeah. Yep.
And has there been any housing proposed since then?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
The purpose of the moratorium is not to prevent housing. It's to prevent the housing we don't want. So it's really provides local control. If we get our regulations correct and we provide enough flexibility within our regulations to allow housing to be built where and what type of housing we want, and we should be able to see that. We just don't want the 830G, to Lynn's point. Some of these projects, they cause a lot of controversy for good reason. They're not always in places that we want the housing to be created or at the scale. And so, the longer we keep that moratorium in place, the better off we are, because we can then direct how best to address our own housing needs through our own regulations and policies. So that's the point of the moratorium. It's not to foreclose housing development, it's just to direct it appropriate channels. So that's the update on developments. I won't go through that. Housing Trust Fund, real quick. Our balance as of the end of March is $1.7 million, $1,738,926. But of that, we have reserved $577,800 for both High Street and Parkview Commons, leaving an uncommitted balance available for us to utilize of $1,168,926. So that's where we stand. Parkview Commons, I did send out a note. I don't know if, I thought I sent out a note, but Habitat is planning to do a groundbreaking on May 30th at 12 noon. And you all are invited.
You say May 30th?
May 30th. And that's the new developments at 385 and 409 Quincy Street. The new duplexes, elevated duplexes there. So that's the initial groundbreaking that's planned for those two properties.
May 30th at what time?
12 noon. And then we are fully done with 244 Greenfield Street. That was the first Habitat project. And we're working to develop the property next door, 254 Greenfield Street, which will hopefully go to the plan, and will go to the Board of Select Persons in May to present a development agreement for their approval. And then following that, a ground lease to Habitat so that they can move forward and build 2 more duplexes on Greenfield Street. That probably will require some relief from our existing zoning. It's not, they're not quite zoning compliant in terms of the lots. So we'll probably need either a variance or some modification to our zoning regulations to allow for 2 duplexes to be built there. So that's, we're hoping, and their Habitat's going for funding in June to the state of Connecticut for that project. So,
Parkview?
No, Greenfield Street.
Oh, okay.
So they need to have.
The Chaffa, you mean, like that? Chaffa?
Yeah, Chaffa or DOH, I don't recall, but we had conversations. They tried to get funding for Quincy Street, and I told them we've been down this path many times, and it's not going to work, and they wanted to try anyway, and we had conversations. At the end of the day, the state said, no, we can't fund it, because it's in a flood zone, and so we've run into this barrier before.
Yeah.
So they're 250, but they really want to help Habitat, so we teed them up for 254 Greenfield Street. And I don't have anything else to report on the other 2 items, really.
Have they tried McKinsey Bezos' charity?
Who?
McKinsey Bezos?
Oh,
He gives a lot of money to
and they got money from.
Yeah, I was gonna say, oh,
They
okay.
got money
They
from
got
it.
money from
Yeah.
it.
The local chapter, Habitat of Coastal Fairfield County, got a gift from.
Yeah, because if you look at the gifts she's given, that's a lot of habitat. Yeah.
They did.
$5 million.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
But, that's just, it really is, it's, we're providing the land for free, and we still can't make the numbers work. So these are truly affordable home ownership housing opportunities. So the cost of construction using the Habitat volunteer model is such that doesn't break you. So that just shows you what we're up against. The housing cost, you can't make the numbers. just on housing. And you're taking land completely out of the equation. So even the cost of construction is such that these things would be selling at a loss. And no one would do that without subsidy.
It's a nationwide dilemma.
Yeah, the home ownership thing is really vexing.
That's it for old business part?
That's it for me.
Okay. Anything else anyone have for this evening? Okay, anything else, everybody? Great, we'll catch you offline about the question on affordability, so
I would love that.
you got a minute afterwards, we
Yeah,
can talk about
that'd be
that.
fantastic.
There's some the one interesting bill that looks like it might get passed up in legislature is the Golden Girls bill, which I don't know how much that would impact us, but where it's legal to rent out an apartment, a room in your home. And I guess there's a hodgepodge of laws across the state regarding that, and they're trying to make it statewide. Got a lot of support, so it looks like it might get passed.
Very interesting. And nothing new on Yigby, I guess we're still waiting to see where that proceeds.
On what?
Yigby?
Maybe, yeah, I don't think it's
God's
gonna
backyard.
make it this, I don't think it's gonna make it this year, but we're still lobbying for it, but the first year, so.
Have you got any feedback about?
Yeah, I mean, they're pretty positive. So they don't like sort of going around TPV. It's really the goal of it is to streamline approval, and so that's been an issue. And then the other issue is the identification of the charitable organization. There was a lot of discussion of Satan worshipers. Believe it.
Shocking.
We finally had to say in
a
our
lot of them in this state.
finally had to say in our oral testimony that, well, if the federal government recognizes them as a 501c3 organization and they've owned the land for 3 years, yes, they can build affordable housing even if they're Satan worshipers. So it's a little bit out there sometimes, the conversations.
I just don't think out of the box enough. I just wouldn't have imagined that coming up as an issue.
Yeah, oh, repeatedly coming up, yeah.
Well, great. Well, thank you for that. Then I guess we can go ahead and adjourn.
Motion to adjourn, yeah.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Greg,
guys. Thank you.
Donna.